Hi everyone, thank you for joining. I'm just going to leave it maybe 1 or 2 more minutes. I think we've still got people joining the meeting. Okay, so it's just gone 10. I can see the participant numbers are going up kind of relatively slowly. So I'm guessing that we've got most of the participants here in the meeting. So I will make a start. My name is Sarah Barr and I am Learning and Research Advisor for Crisis Anticipation and Risk Financing. And we wanted to spend the next half hour sharing the results of the first programme evaluation of crisis anticipation at the START network. So I'll start with a little bit of contextual information, just reminding you what we mean by crisis anticipation and explaining the kind of hows and whys of why we chose to do this evaluation. And then I will share some of the findings and our thoughts going forward. I'm not going to take questions as we go along, just in the interest of time, but I'm hoping that we'll have maybe 10 minutes for questions at the end. So feel free to put anything in the chat box as it pops into your mind, or you will get an opportunity at the end to ask questions. And on that note, we will jump in. And the slides never move when you try to move them, do they? So just as a kind of rough overview, when I'm referring to crisis anticipation at the START network, we are referring to the anticipation work that we launched in 2016, which was the ability to enable START network members to access the START fund on the basis of a forecast, instead of waiting for something to happen and then afterwards trying to raise funds. And when we launched Anticipation, we started sort of testing and innovating and trying a whole range of approaches to enable people, START network members, to access, interpret, and make use of different types of forecasting and risk analysis. So this included providing small grants for collaborative risk analysis at the national level to enable START network members to reach a shared understanding of risk and develop scenarios. It included bringing quality forecasting information to the network, so creating partnerships with forecasting experts within academia and the private sector. And of course, it included the no regrets financial incentives, the ability to actually use the START fund on the basis of a forecast to try to mitigate harm and loss, and to really take a no regrets approach to that, by which we mean being sort of open to funding projects, even if we're not 100% sure if the crisis will come to fruition, or if we just want to test some activities to see if they actually work. And then alongside that sort of array of testing and innovation, we've also made a sort of consistent effort in building the evidence base and in capacity building, which has included all sorts of forms, but has involved a lot of reaching out to members and describing how to access the anticipation window. But after 3 years, we really we saw the scale of anticipation growing. And whilst we were kind of happy with the progress, we thought that it was a good opportunity to take a step back and figure out what was working, what wasn't working, what do we want to consolidate and build, and what do we potentially want to throw by the wayside. So the purpose of this evaluation was really to give us that opportunity to pause, reflect, look at our data, and make some decisions about the future. So how did we do that? There were 3 questions that we were interested in. The first question was the impact of anticipation at the community level. So what kind of changes or impacts or values are we seeing within communities where we've conducted anticipation work? What's been the impact of our team's work in enabling crisis anticipation? So have the partnerships worked? We've had this group called Forewarn, where we bring together forecasting experts with the membership. We were interested in the impact of all of that enabling work. And then, of course, we were interested in value for money. So in order to answer those 3 really quite different questions, we brought together quite a wide-ranging data set, which included community-level data collection through focus groups and informant interviews in 3 anticipation alerts. So we looked at Sri Lanka, anticipation of monsoon flooding, Somalia, anticipation of cholera, and Nigeria, anticipation of election violence. So we were keen to get a variety of hazards and geographies, as you can see. We also conducted a quantitative stakeholder survey, which went out mainly to members, but also to donors and some of our other early action stakeholders. And that asked questions on a scale around what you think about the quality of our forecasts, the impact of our work, etc. There were also about 21 key informant interviews, again, with a wide range of stakeholders, from people implementing anticipation alerts in a variety of contexts to some of our stakeholders at the headquarters level. And then for value for money, we took both a kind of quantitative and qualitative approach to this, looking at our financial reporting, but also on perceptions of value for money across our different stakeholders. And we looked from October 2016 to April 2019. And it's probably worth mentioning that we contracted this out. We wanted this to be an independent evaluation rather than us kind of marking our own homework, as it were. So we worked with an organisation called Integrated Risk Management Associates on this. So what did we find? First of all, just to give like an impression of scale, it included 22 activated alerts, 9 analysis for action grants, around 2.5 million in disbursements, and an extra 3.4 million leveraged off the back of the anticipation alerts. So that was the kind of reach. And then I'll start first on the enabling work. So I guess what we were really pleased with when we started this work, of course, we were interested in reaching communities to mitigate harm and loss, but we also saw this as a kind of exercise in trying to support a culture shift towards a more proactive humanitarian system. And the finding that I really liked from that was that 64% of Start Network members have acted on the basis of a forecast for the first time since crisis anticipation launched in 2016. And you can see this bar chart on the left-hand side kind of illustrates that visually. So whilst we were really happy with that, you can also see that there's a large target group who are yet to act on the basis of a forecast, and we will of course be reaching out to them. And you can also see that over 3/4 of our members are now acting on the basis of a forecast either once a year or more. So we saw that as some really positive indications around the progress towards the culture shift that we're trying to work towards. And then just some sort of stats around our enabling work. 98% of respondents agreed or strongly agreed that forecasting partnerships had positively impacted the work of their own organisations. So that shows us that Start Network members are actually being able to use the information that we're bringing. 88% of respondents agreed or strongly agreed that Forewarn helped them to advocate for more engagement in their own organisations. And 91% agreed that Forewarn influenced the value for money their organisation offers. So obviously part of our kind of proposition is that we can access forecasting information on behalf of the network, and then only we have to do it, and we have to project manage it and arrange the contract, and it brings the information to the whole network. So that positive reflection on the kind of value that that's bringing was a good indication. And then there was a little quote here from the evaluation, which sort of summed up some of this, which was that despite being a relatively new and financially modest addition to the Start Fund, Anticipation has had distinct impact among its members. It's had a strong influence on creating a culture of anticipatory action. However, of course, there were a few home truths that we've been interested in sort of addressing since, which I also wanted to share. So one of them is that the evaluation showed quite clearly that we need to continue to work to build the evidence base for early action. We need to better understand our impact and value at the community level. We need to get more information around, how this work is having an impact or not, and where it's best suited to being used. A second finding, which I think we often grapple with at the Start Network, was around breadth versus depth. The evaluation reflected that whilst we've engaged very widely across a large range of hazards, geographies, we've tried to work with lots of different forecasters, we've perhaps struggled to engage deeply enough in specific places or organisations to support a kind of longer, more sustainable change. So that's also something that we've been working on through consolidating our Forewarn work in 3 countries, and through bringing together our anticipation and risk financing teams. Some of our forecasters reflected back that while they like providing information, they aren't always fully satisfied because they don't see the impact of their support. So we need to get better at reflecting back how forecasting information is used and how that kind of technical advice is improving the quality of our decision making. And then another finding which came through quite clearly was that we still have work to do, which I think is really ongoing, on clarifying key concepts around anticipation and being clear around what anticipation can and can't do. So yeah, there's a few things that we're sort of thinking about going forward. Moving on to community level impact. So yeah, to look at community level impact, we had the 3 case studies where we collected data from communities, and alongside that we had key informant interviews with people who've ran anticipation alerts in a few other different places, for example, DRC, Mongolia, Philippines. And then we also asked people in the survey what they thought about the impact of crisis anticipation. And you can see those survey results there. I won't go through them, they're not super friendly, but I just thought I'd put them there to illustrate. Overall, the indications seem to be that project stakeholders are very confident that projects are achieving their objectives in mitigating harm and loss, and that anticipation is a very versatile tool. We've used it for everything from trying to limit cholera cases, to protecting livestock, to protecting agricultural land, and the flexibility and sort of openness to innovation that we've had has meant that anticipation has been a very versatile tool. And you can see the sort of diversity and impacts encaptured in these 2 different quotes from community members in Sri Lanka and Somalia. So in Sri Lanka, a community member reflected that if the activities which were around monsoon flooding did not happen at the time, our school, well, garden, fences would have collapsed and more people would be displaced. In Somalia, quite different. If Trochara had not assisted us in time with this preventative strategy, we would have faced deep problems. If the intervention had been delayed and the disease broke out, we would have been faced with Khalis, fatal danger. The disease would have spread quickly. There they're referring to a cholera outbreak. But again, whilst there were sort of positive indications of impact, the evaluation also highlighted a few sort of areas, sticky areas that we're still grappling with, that I'll share a couple of reflections on. So that was on forecasting, gender, and timeliness. So what about forecasts? Obviously, forecasting humanitarian emergencies is hard, and real life digresses substantially from the scenarios that we've laid out, and that was quite clear. We've seen differences in terms of geography, in terms of scale, in terms of intensity of a crisis, and I think, of course, at the START network, we see differences, or we aren't necessarily too concerned about all of our forecasts not coming to fruition, because we see that as a kind of characteristic of a healthily risk-taking humanitarian system. But we do also feel that we need to continue to work on the quality of our forecasts, and make sure that that information is used as well as possible. And you can see here the report found that of the projects that were reviewed, so they looked at 20 projects. 4 reported that the crisis unfolded pretty much as expected and that the funding was the right amount. Around 14 said that either it didn't unfold or that it unfolded to a lesser extent. And 2 said that the crisis was substantially greater than expected. When we first looked at this, we were a bit concerned, and I sort of did a deeper piece of analysis, and wrote a piece on this because I was very curious about this finding. And one of the things that I was particularly interested in was that actually of those that didn't unfold, a really large proportion of them were disease outbreaks. And to me, at first, when I thought 14 not unfolding is a lot, but then when I realized that they were disease outbreaks, and we saw from some of the results, for example, from the Somalia case study, I kind of hoped that at least some of those not unfolding were because of the success of strategies to limit the spread of cholera. For example, quite a few of those projects referred to. So that was one area. A second area was gender. The evaluation showed that anticipation is very gendered, and the way that men and women access, interpret, and act on forecasting information varies quite widely. So, for example, in Nigeria, ahead of elections, men and women accessed risk information from different sources and noticed different warning signs that potentially there was going to be some tension around the elections. Whereas in Sri Lanka, men and women reflected differently on the impact of the project and why it was useful and what was useful about it. So we'll be conducting further research into some of this to help us better understand the gendered dimensions of early action, and particularly around sort of accessing, interpreting, and acting on risk information. Another sticky issue is timeliness. Of course, the whole point of anticipation is to enable more timely alerts. Have we actually accomplished that? I think we are becoming more timely. We're enabling earlier action, but there's still room for improvement. The analysis of reports indicated that 28% of anticipation alerts have been activated before the crisis onset. A quarter of interviewees agreed that projects had been implemented before the crisis onset. Again, I was quite curious about this result, and did a longer piece of analysis. And what it shows is that, as we probably all know on the call, pinpointing the onset of a crisis is tricky. Some crises don't have an easy to pinpoint start date, for example, slow onset crises. Some crises have their onset in different times, in different places on different days, for example, a cyclone. And some are quite subjective, complex crises. People will have different perceptions around what the actual tipping point was. But in terms of the work that we're interested in, I guess there are two things. One of them is trying to sort of triangulate the information as much as possible around what is happening when. And then the second is around trying to identify as far as possible what the window of opportunity to act would be, and try to make sure that we're acting in that window of opportunity as much as possible, bearing in mind that we're sort of aiming for a very small sweet spot in between a forecast becoming accurate enough to act and still having enough lead time within which to take good actions. But timeliness was, yeah, another issue which came out as sticky. Not surprising, but definitely something to think about going forward. And then the final slide that I wanted to share was around value for money. So again, we looked at quite a few different dimensions of value for money. There was a reflection that members still see raising and conducting anticipation alerts compared to response alerts as quite kind of heavy and labour intensive. I think hopefully as sort of comfort with using forecasts and risk analysis improves, that perception will also improve. But yeah, people are still seeing the upfront investment quite high, and allocation amounts at country level as really quite low compared to what would be needed for full coverage. But then on the upside, in a few contexts, so Sri Lanka, Somalia, Mongolia, the reflections were that anticipation activities are much more economical than response activities. So while the investment in conducting like a relatively robust risk analysis and the uncertainty of asking for funds for something which hasn't yet happened might make the upfront investment high, people implementing projects were reflecting that the actual project interventions were more economical than response. And there's a quote there that sort of encapsulates that. I think the cost slightly higher and the quality slightly lower would be affected in the case of a response in the same location. So those are sort of the key areas, the results that I wanted to share. And I think now we have about 10 minutes for questions. Anyone is happy to, anyone's free to jump in. I'll just have a quick look at the chat as well. So somebody, Norman, during some rota meetings, the participants felt that some of the response alerts could have qualified for an anticipation alert at an earlier start. Do we know why START network members might be hesitant to do anticipation alerts? I mean, that is a great question. I feel like that should be a question for other START network members, not for myself. But I think probably my reflection would be that it's something around what I was just highlighting in this value for money bit, which is that with the unfamiliarity of the information and with the START fund as it is a fund which you may or may not be able to access if you make the effort to do an alert, I think that people perhaps still find it a little bit difficult and unpredictable of raising anticipation alerts. And yeah, of course, we have more work to do on shifting that and better supporting members. Any other questions or reflections? Value for money needs to be seen in the whole, not just on a case-by-case basis. Inevitably, some will be, yeah. Yeah, I think that's a fair comment. Anyone else? Oh, there's quite a few coming through. Matthias, thanks for presenting the exciting work. One question on timelines. If only 20% of anticipation alerts get activated ahead of crisis onset, does this have an influence on which activities are funded? Yes, yeah, it does. I mean, first of all, that stat, 28% of anticipation alerts activated ahead of crisis onset, came from the report forms. I analysed the exact same. Alerts using the alert notes and information from the beginning of the alert cycle, and the proportion, if you use that information, that are raised before a crisis onset or before a forecasted peak of a crisis, was a lot higher. I can share information on that. But yeah, of course, it influences which activities are funded, because it impacts your lead time. But yeah, those decisions were made at country level. And then we have, okay, lots of questions now. Gang, we're very excited to launch the program in DRC. Leonie's been instrumental to us from the 27 workshop. Oh, that's great. Helen, can you talk to how you see the future challenges of crisis anticipation and how Start Network is going to address them? Yeah, I mean, I think the challenges are extremely, for me, the main challenge is the fact that with crisis, with climate change, we have more and more extreme weather. So I think for us, the biggest challenge is probably just addressing the scale of need, and making sure that we do it with quality risk analysis. How is Start Network going to address them? Well, I mean, we'll keep doing more of what we have been doing, but I think this year has really been about consolidation, and about trying to make sure that we actually sort of collectively focus our energies on places which really are high risk, where we can have an impact. So DRC being an example, our hub countries all being examples, plus Bangladesh and the Philippines. So trying to be a bit more sort of structured and focused in our approach, I think. And then Emily Monty was asking, can you comment on what anticipation evaluation activities are planned? What's coming next? Yeah, so now with anticipation and risk financing having merged, we're sort of seeing building the evidence base for our anticipation and risk financing work together sort of as a whole. And there are three sort of main areas that we continue to be interested in, one of which is around continuing to look at community level impact of our early actions. And so we're trying to sample early action projects based on really where they have a new element. So that might be if they were triggered off the back of a sort of risk financing arrangement rather than anticipation, or if they're for a hazard that we haven't yet sort of analysed in detail, for example, like conflict. We're also interested in looking at the impact of this work on our members, so trying to track whether sort of comfort and capacity in accessing, interpreting, forecasting information is growing. And then we're also interested in looking at the quality of the systems that we're building, so adapting tools created by others to help us keep a focus on quality, and critically reflect. Oh, there's a question here. Is there any engagement with other entities who are working in the field of early action to ensure complementarity and or lessons learned? That is a great question. And yes, there is engagement with other entities. So at the global level, we have a small group called the Early Action Focus Task Force, which includes the START Network, IFRC, FAO, WFP, UN OCHA, and the Red Cross Climate Centre. And we do quite a lot of work, especially around kind of advocacy and events, to make sure that across the different agencies, we're sort of sharing and just talking about and advocating for early action in a complementary way, so that when we're describing our work to donors, for example, our projects seem relatively coherent, and we try to limit confusion around terminology, for example. And then at the national level, it varies. So some countries, the START network has been working very closely with other entities, some countries less so. But of course, we're very open to working more with other actors. I'm just going to check the time. It's 10:30 now. I don't know if we have I don't know if we need to, I don't know if we need to pause precisely on time or if we can run over a little bit. I think maybe somebody who's been helping with the organization might want to take the Zoom account. Zafia, you're on the line, aren't you? Can we take another couple of minutes or?
Yes, we can take a few minutes more.
Okay, perfect. In that case, let's keep on going. Has there been looked at anticipation alerts which were not activated? If the anticipation crisis happened as written, can we learn something from this and why we were not activated? Yeah, that's another great question. I mean, we've talked about doing this a lot, and it's something that we'd be very open to doing. We've done small bits of follow-up, kind of anecdotally, but we often find ourselves pushed to look in detail at those which have been activated, which leaves looking at those which haven't been activated as kind of yeah, something that would be very nice to have, but that we haven't quite managed to accomplish. But we'd definitely be very curious to see that information. Are there any information in the evaluation on no regrets benefits where an early action intervention was implemented but a crisis did not happen? Yeah, again, that's a great question. So I would probably highlight the anticipation of Ebola work that we funded in Uganda, Rwanda and South Sudan, which would have been in 2018 and the beginning of 2019, I think. So fortunately, none of those countries saw cases, or at least not very many cases of Ebola coming over the border from DRC, but we trained health staff in the areas bordering DRC to identify Ebola cases and manage them effectively. And yeah, of course, those outbreaks didn't happen. But if they do happen at a future point, then I very much hope that the investments that we will have made will still have an impact, because there are people in those communities who know how to manage the cases and what to look for. So I thought that was quite a nice example of no regrets. And then, yeah, so the second question is also on no regrets. I'm just going to see if I've missed any. If anybody wants to sneak in with one last final question, then that is also fine. Otherwise, I think we can finish more or less on time. Thank you so much for everyone for joining. This report and the management response are on our website, so feel free to have a look, chew it over in more detail. And if you have any questions about what you've heard or what you've seen, then feel free to reach out. Very happy to answer more questions. Also very happy to sort of do any more work that you'd like to do with your organizations on trying to build the evidence base for this way of working. And yeah, I really hope to see more of you again throughout the rest of the week.